Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to our session today. I'm excited to welcome Reese, who's going to talk to us about the interface of autism and psychiatry. It's obviously a really important topic for us, and it's actually been coming up a lot in different ways, as Roger and I have had different kinds of meetings and discussions, and certainly always a hot topic on the Facebook page. So we'll get some clarity and be able to ask some questions. Reese has asked that we just allow for the general presentation, which will be about 50 minutes or so, and then we'll have a Q&A. If you have something really important that you want to ask that's relevant, please do just in the chat, write "read" before your comment or question, and we'll try to keep up so that everything is relevant. If you can, please stay on mute unless you're speaking. We have a lot of people with auditory processing challenges, including me, so it's helpful to have background noise taken out. And of course, we're always respectful and kind to one another, so I hardly even feel I ever have to say it. But just for the record, let's make sure everybody gets turns. We always have a lot to say and we get excited, which is great. So let's give everybody a seat at the table. And with that, I'll turn it over to Reese.
Thank you. Yeah, and I was just thinking because of the size, holding questions, it probably might be easier, but if it works better that we end up answering them throughout, we can do that too. We can pivot. So I will screen share and get started. It's always the hardest part. Okay. Can you see the puppies and the slideshow? Great. Great. So you've found yourself in Autism and Psychiatry, Redefining Care Through the Neurodiversity Paradigm. And with me, Reese Ramponi. And let's go from there. So I'm Reese. I'm a white person raised on unceded Athabasca and Dena'ina land in Alaska. I have lived experience as a late diagnosed ADHD autistic person and both an able-bodied and disabled person based on the status of chronic health conditions. I moved to New Haven in 2014 to do Yale's psychiatric nurse practitioner program. And since then, I've lived between New Orleans, Alaska, and New Haven. I work as a psychiatric APRN and group therapist at the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut, where I focus on working with ADHD, autistic, and transgender youth. I also teach with a continuing education company, Neuroabundant, and do consultation, coaching, and parent medication sessions, other various things. I put my website there, and then I have a little slide at the end with a QR code if anybody wants to get in touch. Something I wanted to share, as I was prepping for this talk this week, I noticed I was feeling like more nervous than I usually do for a talk. And at first I thought it was just because there was like a lot of people signed up, but then I thought about it and I realized it was more because I don't know exactly who's in the room today. Like usually I present to medical and healthcare professionals and we have a similar clinical background, so we tend to share a common language. But today you might be therapists, researchers, autistic people, parents, community members with various kinds of expertise. And I found myself worrying I might sound like pedantic. And then I Googled pedantic, which is defined as overly concerned with minute details or formal rules, showing off learning or intelligence in a way that feels excessive. Which honestly, has anyone else just read that definition and thought that that sounds like being autistic? Because that's what I thought. Hyper precise, detail oriented, wanting to explain things thoroughly. I think it's kind of code for caring deeply about precision and clarity and just being really, really into something. So if I use any jargon that doesn't make sense, please feel free to ask in the chat, bring it up in the Q&A. I'm not trying to gatekeep knowledge, just being my nerdy neurodivergent self. I'm just also taking a look at, I can see the chat too. So see someone else is seeing called pedantic too. Yeah. Okay. So my understanding of neurodiversity has been deeply impacted by frameworks of collective liberation and decolonization. So including the voices and pictures of like non-white, non-academic, neurodivergent and disabled folks, and knowing like whose voices I'm incorporating into my practices is an important starting point for me in any presentation that I do. I'll also say that my practice and framework is founded in my undergrad work in critical religion studies and philosophy, specifically existentialism. So some introductions and norms. Roger and Dawn, I can see you both kind of on the top of my people screen. So if at any point I am talking too fast, you can go like this. If I need to speak up, you can all tell me to get louder. Something I also like to do is because I'm not in a room with y'all, so I can't see you all. So if you're hearing things that you really like, that you really relate to, feel free to put some like plus signs in the chat. It can help. It's kind of like snaps in a room, So I'm like, okay, this is a topic people are liking. Maybe I'll go into a little more depth. Feel free to, if you want to. I like that you liked the plus sign idea. Thank you. So feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat if you want to. Oh, hi. I know. Name, pronouns, where you're from, or you call home, and something you care about. You don't have to do that, but about 60-minute info today, 30-minute Q&A. I will be asking for some audience participation throughout the first 60 minutes. Try to hold specific questions until the Q&A, but if we end up not doing that, that's fine too. If you're an ADHDer like me, it might be helpful to grab a notebook or open a document or something to write down questions so you don't lose that, because they go away, don't they? And I assume there's a lot of autistic and other neurodivergent people here, so I wanted to start with a quote from disability justice activist Lydia X.C. Brown. So often we're told there's one right way to exist in a space, to show respect, to be engaged, and I don't believe in that. So my invitation to you here is to do what you need in the space that you're in to be at ease. Do you need food, water? If not, maybe go grab some. Recognizing and honoring what our bodies and minds need and believing that we deserve to have those needs met. That's the foundation of what we're talking about today. So please use the space you're in to be as comfortable as possible. You can be camera on, camera off. You can be moving or not moving. I know I try to use my talks as an opportunity to practice unmasking, to practice authentic existence. I will stop and take a big breath when I need one. I'll move around. I'll probably take a camera off break. And I think those moments can feel awkward or unprofessional, and that's exactly what they're for. So that we can learn that we're allowed to take up space in those ways. Like and seeing people saying hi in the chat. Saw one thing in the chat I wanted to look at. But now it's too quick. So today what we're doing, a little bit of group reflection, and then framing decolonization, disability justice, and the neurodiversity paradigm. I'll be sharing some reflections from my practice throughout. We'll talk about psychiatric medication within a neurodiversity affirming framework. And then we'll have a discussion in Q&A. What we will not cover, the specifics of different medications used in psychiatry for autistic people. I do have a deep dive 3-hour course on that on Friday, which I can share a bit about later. And I won't be giving any specific medical advice. It's my disclaimer. Please don't take this as medical advice. Speak to your healthcare professional before doing anything. Yes. And love seeing how many different places people are here from. I know my parents are logged on all the way from Alaska, which I love. Hi, Mom and Dad. Oh, and the first two things are pink because oh, Sarah signed up for this Friday training. Great. The first two things are pink because that's what we're doing first. So share in the chat, and we'll do this for about like 3 minutes. Like, no, only if you want to. What are your personal viewpoints about psychiatric medication? Like for yourself, for others, just in general? Let's just spend a little time seeing what thoughts are out there. Feel free to write things or see what other people are saying and like their comments. Yeah. Mhm. I think a lot of different perspectives already. Freaking out that they're normed on men. It's a good point. Good point. Mm. Loved your point. Psychiatric medication is complicated by the flaws in the system, just like gender. Mm. Medication, like diagnosis, is often a privilege. I'm seeing a lot of different perspectives and a lot of we often need less than the clinical dose. Dawn, yes, I'm not like specifically covering that today, but that's something I see in clinical practice all the time is when autistic people get started on the starting dose, they have all these side effects, and then people rule out the meds, and it's like no, we start with a fifth of that, a third of that, a tenth of that. Yes, that is my dog Mazzy. She passed away last year, so I try to include pictures of her in my slideshows. Yes. Well, for those of you out there that have had really not great experiences with meds, or feel like pathologized by them, I hope we can like look at some other perspectives for that. And for those of you that are loving them, we'll also share some alternative perspectives to that. I love we need to decolonize psychiatry. Meds can be necessary, but depends on the aim. Yeah. Thank you everyone for, it can be vulnerable to share this kind of stuff, so I appreciate it. Painful trial and error over many, many years. Yeah. I think a great many of people are tried on so many different meds over many years and because they're misdiagnosed. Yeah, if we could define decolonize, I'm unfamiliar with the terminology in this context. Can I do that in a slide or two when I touch on that? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay. You can keep sharing in the chat, but I'll go forward. But also, if anyone else wants to speak up and define decolonize, either in the chat or in out loud, I don't want to be the only one. It would not be a very decolonizing methodology to say that I'm the only one that can define decolonizing, would it? Okay, decolonization, disability justice, and the neurodiversity paradigm. So I'll get back to the colonization question in a minute. So we're gonna, also one thing I'll say is I have notes and I read off of them because otherwise I go on tangents. So I'm gonna be authentic. We're gonna move into some frameworks and ways of understanding what are most commonly described as mental health disorders, which is in the DSM. which is, the diagnostic statistical manual, the book that healthcare providers use to categorize the range of challenging human experiences that come from our mental, emotional, sensory experiences. We're going to start with where we're coming from, like current accepted frameworks, and move towards where we're going or where we'd like to be. I'm going to stop and read something from the chat. Decolonization is basically trying to view things from a non-European perspective and point of view, and having narratives of different cultures instead of what is taught to us. I think that's a great definition. I think there can be ways of thinking about decolonization and decolonization of thought and the way that we're thinking about things, as well as ranging from that to decolonization being literally land back efforts to indigenous people, since the United States is a land that was colonized by the Europeans. One more thing I'll add is I didn't get a chance to change it yet, but I was reading an article about the colonization and how it shows up in academics and in writing. And even the way that we do our introductions is rooted in colonization, because we often share where we went to school, the letters behind our names, the ways that we are esteemed in these certain ways. We don't name our ancestors, our lineages, where we've the land that we grew up on, and who we've learned from in those different ways. So I could go on for a long time about those things. So where we're coming from. This might be new, or this might be stuff that you've already heard a whole bunch of times. So I am going to go over it, but sorry if it's a repeat, and welcome if it is new. So the pathology paradigm or medical model ultimately boils down to two fundamental assumptions. And this is from Nick Walker's essay. Somebody will know the name out there. The master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house. Something, rethinking the autism paradigm. The pathology paradigm boils down to, yes, said in the chat, Audre Lorde was the one who wrote this first metaphor, the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house, which Nick Walker then used as a metaphor to talk about breaking down autism in the pathology paradigm. So the pathology paradigm ultimately boils down to two fundamental assumptions. There's one right, normal, or healthy way for human brains and minds to be configured and to function, or one relatively normal range into which the configuration and functioning of all minds ought to fall. And if your configuration and functioning, and therefore your ways of thinking and behaving, diverge substantially from that, then there is something wrong with you. So the medical model works well for something like blood pressure. There's an abnormal range. If it's too high, you take a medication, it goes back into a normal range. That is healthy. But when we apply this type of rigid model to the human psyche, things can get so much more complicated. There's not a blood test to measure the normal amount of sadness or a normal response to trauma. So in terms of autism, how the pathology, and other forms of neurodivergence, how the pathology paradigm does harm. In terms of a research focus, it frames autism as a disease or disorder, leading to research, so much money, like through Autism Speaks, going to curing autism. Treatment goals are often aimed at reducing or modifying autistic traits rather than supporting the well-being of the individual. There's stigma, misunderstanding, marginalization, and limited support and accommodations, and masking or suppressing natural behaviors like stimming or avoiding eye contact to appear normal contributes to PTSD and alienation from sense of self. I think another note on the impact of the pathology model is the impact on identity development, because I think when you grow up believing that something's wrong with you, especially for the many undiagnosed autistic or ADHD people who don't have a name for what that thing is, that has a really deep impact on identity development. And if a lot of these kids knew they were autistic, had a label for it, and a framing that wasn't based in the deficit model, then they could start learning about the positive parts of being autistic. Like, not like superpowers, toxic positivity, this is all like rainbows and sunshine, but there's pros and cons, just like being allistic has pros and cons. And then they can connect to autistic peers and start learning about the history, the lineage of the minds like ours, and the countless advances in science and psychology and invention led by autistic minds. So I'm thinking Soren Kierkegaard, Carl Sagan, Nikola Tesla, Emily Dickinson, Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon. And if you listen to the Autistic Culture podcast, the episode on Taylor Swift, I'm not like armchair diagnosing Taylor Swift, but listen to that episode of the Autistic Culture podcast, and it's a beautiful description of how so many of her songs, there's a reason so many autistic teen girls love Taylor Swift's songs. You'll probably notice I'm using identity first language, autistic person, rather than person with autism or autism spectrum disorder. This is because for the majority of the people I work with clinically and in trainings and stuff, identity first language is preferred. This is a core aspect of identity, just like sexuality, race, gender, and you wouldn't say a person with gayness, or a person with blackness. So we try to use the identity language first. So the neurodiversity paradigm kind of counters this model and says that the diversity among minds is natural, healthy, and valuable form of human diversity. That there's not a normal or right style of human mind any more than there's a normal or right ethnicity, gender, or culture. And that the social dynamics that manifest in regard to neurodiversity are similar to other forms of human diversity. So diversity of race, culture, gender, sexual orientation. And these also include the dynamics of social power relations, social inequality, privilege, and oppression, as well as the dynamics by which diversity, when embraced, acts as a source of creative potential within a group or society. So the word neurodivergent is often associated with like autism, ADHD, and dyslexia, but it's actually so much more than that. Like to be neurodivergent is to have a mind or brain that diverges from the typical standards of normal, which by definition is literally everything in the DSM, or it wouldn't be in the DSM. And more things like giftedness, for example, which I argue that giftedness has only not been pathologized into the DSM because it's a difference that leads to increased functionality under capitalism, rather than decreased. We can make a distinction between innate neurodivergence and acquired. So like innate being something like autism, ADHD that is with you at birth versus something like traumatic brain injury, trauma. I heard someone talking about their experience of menopause as a form of neurodivergence recently. Something that I would love to hear more about is just the process of aging, of the aging mind as a form of neurodivergence. So just kind of a trigger warning on the following 3 slides. These include references to historical trauma, medical violence, systemic oppression, and suicide, with topics around forced institutionalization, conversion therapy, racism, colonialism, gender-based violence, and homophobia. So please care for yourself in whatever way you need. Step away, take a breath, return when you feel ready. And rather than, I've always tried to describe this, but I just keep coming back to this quote about how disability justice and decolonial frameworks are kind of connected to the neurodiversity movement. So I'm going to read it. One cannot look at the history of U.S. slavery, the stealing of indigenous lands, and U.S. imperialism without seeing the way that white supremacy uses ableism to create a lesser and other group of people that's deemed more worthy, able, smart, and capable. You might hear some neurodivergent kiddos laughing in the background, so I won't apologize for that. We can only truly understand ableism by tracing its connections to heteropatriarchy, white supremacy, colonialism, and capitalism. The same oppressive systems that have inflicted violence upon Black and Brown communities for 500 plus years also inflicted 500 plus years of violence on bodies and minds deemed outside the norm and therefore dangerous. All this is compounded by the ways that ableism, along with queer hatred and the violence of the gender binary, label our bodies and communities as deviant, unproductive, and invalid. And that's from Tooth, Nail, and Bone, a Disability Justice Primer by Sins Invalid. So some framing here, the disability justice movement, some names, Patty Byrne, Mia Mingus, Lydia X.C. Brown, and many others, emerged in response to the limitations of the disability rights movement. It offered the critique that disability rights often failed to speak to the experiences of BIPOC, queer, trans, and other multiply marginalized disabled people. So disability justice centers those the most impacted and recognizes that disability is inseparable from other aspects of identity. So how does this connect? Disability justice and other frameworks like queer liberation, healing justice, mutual aid, these are inherently connected to the neurodiversity movement. But as I've worked in this movement for the last 5 years, I've noticed kind of like a siloing and whitewashing of neurodiversity work a lot of the time. The creation of new tools, books, frameworks that often like recreate the wheel without acknowledging the like long-standing wisdom of Indigenous knowledge systems, of collective care models, of disability and healing justice frameworks that were developed by communities who have always had to build networks of care outside the medical system because it wasn't providing care for them. So I think my point here with all of those words, and thank you for the pluses, because sometimes I feel like I'm just talking on a giant pedestal during this point. I think my point is that without roots in collective care and interdependence and mutual aid, neurodiversity work can unintentionally replicate toxic individualism and productivity-centered frameworks, prioritizing like self-optimization over liberation. So it's not enough to use neurodiversity affirming language to be affirming. We need liberatory structures, power sharing, and cultural groups like this that reflect the values that we claim to hold. And now, for those that were wondering about colonization, I'm going to be connecting colonization to medicine and then medicine to psychiatry. We're getting there, I promise. So medicine has a long history of pathologizing difference. And when I say pathologizing, I mean turning an experience into a disease or disorder. It's historically been used to reinforce or to enforce social norms and define non-normative identities as disorders. It's proportionally targeted marginalized groups, often labeling cultural practices or survival responses as pathological. So examples, women resisting patriarchal control were labeled as hysterical in the 18th and 19th centuries. The 19th century pseudo-diagnosis of drapetomania pathologized enslaved Black individuals' desire to escape slavery. Behavioral traits of Indigenous peoples, often rooted in resistance to colonial invasion, were classified as signs of mental illness, hence residential schools. This history reflects medicine's role in maintaining systems of control over non-European identities. Other examples, homosexuality was listed in the DSM as a mental illness until 1973, justifying conversion therapies aimed at correcting sexual orientation. And just a note, Irving Lobos, who created conversion therapy, also created applied behavioral analysis. The DSM-5's gender dysphoria, which is still slightly pathologizing, was initially transsexualism and then gender identity disorder. And then one specific example that I always have to take a breath before. Alan Turing. He's a well-known historical figure who was both gay and autistic. He played a critical role in cracking Nazi codes in World War II and is often credited with shortening the war by years. Unfortunately, Turing was prosecuted for homosexuality in the 1950s and was forced to undergo chemical castration. He died by suicide in 1954. It can be really hard to hear this story, but I always tell it because his story reminds us that autistic and queer people have always had a history. It's just not the one that we're told or read about in the history books we read in high school. Watching the movie about him broke me too. It was one of the first times I realized how many of the amazing people in history were queer or neurodivergent. Also, the ugly laws were a thing in the US until 1974 that literally said, like, don't go out in public unless you're pretty. Those are only like repealed in the 70s. Yeah. Colonization was in the chat. Colonization was also early empires taking over indigenous European cultures. It was mastered in Europe before it left Europe. That is a really, really good point about, and I think colonization happens all over the world. And I think if anyone's read Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed about how the oppressed becomes the oppressor, it is an example of, yeah, very real. So psychiatry as a tool of colonialism. So psychiatry has been kind of weaponized to discipline and correct people who deviate from social norms, often labeling resistance or noncompliance as a mental illness. So this is rooted in the same logic that justifies colonial domination. So the belief that divergence from the norm is dangerous and must be corrected. And autistic behaviors are often framed as deficits because they challenge the productivity-focused hierarchical structures that are central to capitalist and colonial ideologies. So medication, I'm only talking about medication, when prescribed to suppress traits like hyperactivity, sensory sensitivity, or emotional expression, can echo this legacy by enforcing compliance rather than addressing systemic barriers. And I think that's what so many of folks who have been on medication have experienced. All of those things I was just talking about are part of this thing called the medical industrial complex. And so if you Google Mia Mingus medical industrial complex, you can see it. I just like to show this because it's like, what were all those words? It was really complicated. It is really complicated. I don't understand all of it either. So this is just to show how complicated it all is. So a couple reflections from practice. And after the reflections from practice, we'll talk about some like, is medication inherently not affirming? How can it be? And get some of your feedback. So I'm gonna take a quick second. I went to an occupational therapy training a while back, and they had like an hour-long break in the middle, and they had everyone like stand up and stretch and move around like every 20 minutes. And I was like, I think occupational therapy knows where it's at. So it actually feels like a good time for that now. So not an hour-long break. I think just let's see, like 1 to 2 minute break. It's been a lot of information so far. I'm gonna move around, bounce around. Let's come back at 7:38. Back in about 30 seconds. Oh, I was muted. I was just saying that was a good break. So sometimes I talk too much about theory and I forget to talk about my actual like experiences and practice that led me to think about all this stuff. So as I said, I'm a child psychiatry provider and group therapist at the Child Guidance Center of Southern Connecticut. I wanted to share a little bit about the changes that I've seen in the last 5 years there. So over the last 5 years, myself and other autistic ADHD staff have worked with our psychology training program. We have a postdoctoral and predoctoral one, as well as therapy staff on implementing training on neurodiversity affirming care. We are the only place in Connecticut that I know of that does the MIGDAS-2, which is a more affirming measure than the ADOS for high masking clients, specifically for teenagers that takes Medicaid in Connecticut. If anyone knows of another one, does the MIGDAS for teens and takes Medicaid, let me know. And that was huge because when I started at the job 5 years ago, they were referring autistic kids out to ABA because it was out of our scope. And we went all the way there from having more autistic kids than we have capacity for coming to us for everything from individual to family work to psychiatry. And a number of our interns and postdocs and behavioral health students stayed with the agency. So this has led us to have clinicians and leadership with lived autism ADHD experience. And we have our psychology intern program has a neurodiversity affirming track and a gender specialty track. So this is just to say, like, I don't know if anyone else out there, if you're neurodivergent and in mental health, but like change takes time and it's been really cool to see it actually happening. We're still looking for another neurodiversity affirming therapist if you want to work in Stanford. So our therapists work from a neurodiversity affirming framework. There's a lot to that, but one part I love is the idea of autonomous over independent. So we often hear, I hear from parents, I just want my kid to be independent when they grow up. But we have to reflect on where this idea comes from and remember that independence is a cultural value, and it's a Western/US cultural value. There's individualistic cultures and there's collectivist cultures. And if kids, teens, young adults are taught that interdependence is okay, that it's okay to rely on others, and focus on learning how to identify support needs and ask for them, then we can move away from this toxic individualism of let's just make sure we teach these teenagers how to function on their own, to let's teach them and like the skills to be independent adults and move towards self-advocacy. And how can we teach people to know what they need, assert what they need, and create communities of care where they can get what they need in a collective way. And this can be really hard in a society that does make that very difficult. So just a note, implementing neurodiversity affirming accommodations at home and school and neurodiversity affirming methods and therapy leads to reduced medication. Hands down, I've been doing this for 6 years now. And when we put these things in place, the amount of meds people are on go down. In the chat, the pluses. So would someone explain? I asked in the beginning to people put pluses in the chat when they're hearing things they resonate with or they like, so that I can kind of get feedback on what's resonating for folks and dig into some of those points. And this will be kind of a long story, but it's an important story. So leading a group for autistic and ADHD teenagers has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career. What I've seen mirrors emerging research. So Melanie Hayworth out of Australia, a PhD, highlights in her research how anxiety and depression rates decrease when children develop a positive association with their autistic identity. And I saw this in the group, and it led to almost all of the teenagers in the group being on less medications than they were when they started the group. So as growing evidence shows, seems obvious, mental health improves when people are allowed to be themselves safely and authentically and have opportunities for authentic human connection. Some of the goals for our group are positive identity development, unlearning internalized ableism, building self-advocacy skills, and supporting executive functioning. Some of the feedback from participants, several teens shared that like it was for the first time they felt accepted and understood. I remember one teen saying the group helped them finally have a quote, finally have a space where I can just be myself without worrying about masking all the time. And almost every single group member was hesitant to join the group due to past negative experiences in group therapy. And I was like, I promise it's different. I promise, I promise, I promise, I promise. Just come for one day. And they all stayed. And I think I want to go in a little bit to before I go into the group norms, just a little bit on the group goals. Because what they are. So positive identity development involves recognizing and affirming their neurodivergent identities, celebrating strengths while addressing challenges. Unlearning internalized ableism. Many teens struggle with internalized ableism, which is negative beliefs around their ADHD or autism that they've absorbed from society. So we work together to identify and change those beliefs. Self-advocacy includes recognizing their rights and understanding how to articulate them. And I think supporting executive functioning is a little bit obvious. I saw, yeah, we need this group for adults too. There is, so Jamie Roberts runs a monthly free, Jamie Roberts, you can find her on the socials as, I think just as neurodivergent therapist. I think she grabbed that handle quick. From California, she runs a monthly free adult social group. And then Ivy Anna Rizzo from New Mexico runs one that's not free, but it's not an expensive one. I'd happy to put together a little list of these if somebody emails me and reminds me, and I can post it in the Facebook. There was Ivy Anna Rizzo and Jamie Roberts. And if somebody reminds me, I'll put a little list together and get it posted in the Cassie Facebook group. Noted with a lot of my students, internalized ableism was intertwined with internalized racism. That is a very good point, and it is very true. There was a question, Paul said, you think when autistic people come together, it sort of goes against the narrative, we don't need social interactions? Yes, exactly. So last part on this. I'm doing so good at like actually keeping up with the chat while I'm doing this. I hope it's not distracting, but yeah. So one of the most powerful parts that like brought me to tears, what was in leading this group was we've been together for 2 years. People have kind of taken on their own roles. We have the keeper of the lists that reminds us when we're getting off track and we're supposed to be discussing something today. We have the special interest moderator, which reminds us that we're supposed to have 5 minutes of every week for someone to share about their special interest. We have the timekeeper, the one that tells us there's 30 seconds until the time is up for the group. And also pretty much everybody shows up on time, which is really remarkable. But so we had a time when we had some new members join, and I was like, all right, guys, part of this now is we get to determine what our group norms are. And they came up with these beautiful norms that were so different from the norms of, as I've been leading group therapy for years, I was trained in group therapy, and they're just so different from neurotypical group norms. So imagine going to a group where interrupting is okay, especially if it's to ask a clarifying question, where info dumping is encouraged, where stimming is welcome and supported, where participation is flexible. You're still allowed to come to group if you need to be camera off and in the chat with emojis only. There's no forced turn taking. People can jump in when ready and respond asynchronously if needed. And yeah, people are going to interrupt each other. People are going to take up too much space. But also, when we get comfortable with a culture of blunt communication, then somebody else can interrupt and say, hey, X, you've taken up a lot of space today. Can I talk now? And then they say, yeah, sure. And we lose a lot of that sensitivity that comes in neurotypical spaces. Literal thinking is welcome. We clarify metaphors and check for multiple interpretations. And meltdowns and shutdowns are not shameful. We hold space and normalize this regulation. Sometimes we turn on music and everybody moves together. It can be really hard to create a space that makes space for everyone's movement needs while also making space for that some people are really visually sensitive to movement. It's yeah. And I'll take a little reading break on this next one. If somebody else wants to read out loud, they can. But I just wanted to compare this to kind of what the typical group therapy norms would be. So if someone wants to read out loud, they can. My voice just needs a break for a second.
It's a little small on my screen because I'm using my phone, but Roger, can you read that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Reflections from practice, typical group therapy norms. Quote, camera on helps connection and engagement, unquote. Quote, one person speaks at a time / no interrupting, unquote. Quote, let's stick to the topic, unquote. Quote, let's take turns sharing, unquote. Quote, no side conversations in chat, unquote. Quote, make eye contact / use body language cues, unquote. Quote, be aware of tone / how you come across, unquote. Quote, we expect verbal participation from everyone, unquote. Quote, let's minimize distractions, fidgeting, movement, etc., unquote. And quote, respect is shown by listening quietly, unquote.
Thank you. I'm just playing in the chat. And I think I'm doing pretty good on time. I usually end up 10 minutes behind, so yeah. Typical group norms sound exactly like the unspoken expectations for my business meetings. Yes, Alex. I work on a smaller team within a larger team with our gender clinic, and over the years in there, it's been really wonderful to see how we've deconstructed some of these norms, and people appreciate it. Not just autistic people. A lot of people would love to have a camera off day. A lot of people get exhausted by being seen all the time. Speaking of that, I'll take a little camera off break and keep talking. So getting into the meat, is medication inherently not neurodivergent affirming? So here is some like counterpoints if this was a debate. So this is it's not neurodivergent affirming side. Psychiatric meds are often prescribed to mitigate behaviors or traits seen as undesirable or disruptive. This reinforces the notion that autistic traits are inherently problematic rather than valid expressions of human diversity. So it's inherently not affirming. Autistic people, especially children, may be coerced into taking meds by caregivers, schools, and employers. This undermines their autonomy and validity of their lived experience. By taking meds to fix traits, autistic people may internalize the belief that their natural ways of being are unacceptable or inferior. Medication makes autistic people reliant on medical systems that historically have not prioritized their autonomy or well-being. These are all very true things. But kind of the work that I've been doing in trying to create, like, there's not a book out there on neurodiversity affirming psychiatry. When I first Googled it a few years ago, I was like, does this even exist? So I've been trying to kind of make it up and figure it out on my own. And with some other wonderful autistic psychiatric APRNs, but there's not that many of us. So with a neurodiversity affirming approach, I'll explain what that looks like in a few minutes. Medication can, and I promise I only have a couple slides left. I'll be done talking about 8. Medication can be a tool for self-determination. So when we make informed decisions about medication, we assert control over our own care. So neurodiversity affirming practices focus on providing this choice free of coercion or judgment. An example of this from practice, while not autism specific, but a great example, is how ADHD teenagers often want to stop their stimulant medications between 6th and 8th grade consistently, which is as the need for independence cognitively develops. If they're forced to continue them, challenges of all types arise. But parents hate this, but I listen to them, try to get the parents on board with reductions or vacations from the meds. And then I reflect with the teens on their ADHD experiences without meds, identify the challenge areas they are experiencing, and they usually decide to restart on their own accord and with a better understanding of what the med does and how it's helping them. But had they been forced to keep taking it without that autonomy, it doesn't go as well. Number 2, they can be an aid for inaccessible environments. So they can help autistic people navigate neurotypical environments by mitigating the overload caused by systemic inaccessibility. So example, like risperidone, FDA approved for irritability in autism. The systemic issue is that the use of medication often avoids addressing the root cause of the irritability. Like, yes, risperidone can increase cognitive flexibility and reduce irritability in response to change. But if we advocate for environments that minimize unexpected change and categorize sensory needs, we can avoid the use of risperidone or have it minimized. But at the same time, we have to remember that not all situations can be controlled, and not all kids or adults have environments that are safe and predictable, even with therapeutic interventions. So in situations of uncontrolled and unexpected change with folks who have minds that need consistency and routine, many autistic kids and adults choose to be on risperidone or a similar med because it genuinely makes their life easier. I have some teens and even younger kids that they start asking, they're like, Christmas break is coming up, like, do I get my meds? Because they only take their meds around school breaks because it's a change in routine, and that's really dysregulating for them. And they can address co-occurring challenges. So like anxiety, depression, executive dysfunction. And also and complex trauma that comes from the neurominority stress of existing as autistic in an allistic world. So as part of this holistic approach, I think I touched on this on the last slide, but choosing risperidone with faced with unexpected change, or choosing to take ADHD medication because it allows clarity and focus to work towards your self-determined goals. It can supplement other supports. We prioritize accommodations, community support, coping strategies, and medication can complement these supports without replacing them. And also, we're reducing distress, not identity. And this can be key when advocating with the medical providers. Medication does not erase neurodivergence, but it helps reduce distressing experiences, which can be helpful. Also reduce resisting ableism through choice. Like choosing medication on your own terms can reclaim agency from systems that historically pathologize. And it can improve quality of life in the short term while we're working on creating systemic changes. Someone asked in the chat, what does risperidone do? It is an antipsychotic. It's used in high doses for schizophrenia, medium doses for bipolar, low doses for treatment-resistant depression, OCD, and irritability and autism, amongst other things. And so on this last one, I'd love to hear, I have a couple notes, but I also want to hear what y'all think. So, and if you can't get all your thoughts out on this topic, feel free to email me, because I really like to include in my talks, like, how people actually think psychiatric providers need to evolve. Let me just take a drink of water.
While you're getting a little drink, I forgot to mention that when we do open the Q&A, if you could, all of us use the raising your hand icon under the reactions. There's a little button there, or I think you can just wave in the screen if you want to get someone's attention. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. So how can psychiatric providers evolve? One, abandon deficit-based frameworks. So view autism as a form of neurodivergence. This can look like embracing holistic models that include these other things we were talking about. Two, promote client autonomy and choice in medication process, remembering the client is the expert. Clients and parents often come into me looking for an expert opinion. And I explain that I don't see myself as an expert, but more of a translator. I've had the privilege of access to all the medical and psychological learning, and my job is to translate that in ways that they understand so they can make informed decisions about their health, because they are the experts of their own experience. Another key part of this is how we talk to kids, and some people really don't like this. They're like, I came for an expert opinion, and I'm like, okay, you can see somebody else. I'm not saying I'm not an expert in my field, but I'm saying that you are the expert in yourself. Another key part of this is how we talk to kids about meds. Like, almost every kid I see doesn't know what their meds are for if they come in on meds, have not been asked their opinions or consent around taking medication. It can take a lot of translating to explain this in info in a way that matches their developmental stage. But it's like essential, and I don't prescribe meds that kids don't consent to taking for an experience that they see as harmful, not just a behavior or experience that their parents and schools thinks are problematic. Three, advocating for systemic changes that reduce the need for meds, as like going to PPT meetings, supporting students getting accommodations, and parent coaching to teach parents how to support those. I lead a parent group too that really focuses on that. And then lastly, for any, I guess if there's any psychiatric folks out there, like, educate your peers. I've been doing trainings on neurodiversity affirming psychiatry for a few years, and it's honestly really, really hard to get psychiatric people to come. Like, therapists always come. Or organizations to hire me to talk to their medical teams. Trainings, I think it has to do with the models we're coming from. So like medical versus therapeutic, and what it takes to unlearn those models. I'll have a QR code for when people can learn about the things. So often the best educating on this comes from one-to-one discussions between psychiatry providers and the willingness of neurotypical providers to listen and learn from their autistic peers. I really want to get us to the Q&A. I had some advocating for yourself with prescribers notes, but I think we can have those available in the recording so that we can get to the Q&A, if that's okay with everybody. Leave them up for a minute for the recording. So if you want to scan the QR code that that goes to my website, or this will be in the recording. These are some of the things that I offer. And that's also where you can email me, send a message. If you want to hear about upcoming stuff, just send me a message. or if you want to come to the training on Friday and need a big, like a discount or anything, because you're not a healthcare provider and you still want to come. Could I send the QR code in Meetup too? I don't know how to do that. Roger, is that a thing we can do afterwards?
Yeah, I think there's a way to upload, there's definitely ways to upload images. I'm going to put that link that you sent me previously in the chat, because that takes you to the same place. Is that correct?
Well, just put the one for my website in the chat. Yeah, just put my website in the chat. And I guess, Roger, maybe afterwards you could just update the meetup event with a couple details. And then Roger, the link that you have, and also I'll put in the chat my email. I can't get my thing to go to the, here we go. Easiest thing, if you want to get in touch with me, just click the email right now and send a 2-word message so you know we got connected. And Roger, this is the link that I gave you. Oh no, this isn't either. This is to sign up for my medication course that's on Friday. Sorry, this wasn't, I guess, a very good way to do this. I should have just had the codes. I'll put this in the chat in a minute. And this one is the one I gave you, Roger, which is just my huge resources slide.
Let's drop that in right now.
For evaluations, the person has to be located in the state that the provider is licensed. But there's a great organization that is licensed in a whole bunch of spaces and is neurodiversity and trans affirming. It's called NeuroSpark. I really highly recommend them, and they're also affordable. So I think I will go ahead and stop the share. Did I stop the share? Yes, I did. And yeah, let's get started with some questions and answers. What's up?
Sorry if this was addressed earlier. I don't know if my camera's not turning on. I just turned it on. But I sorry if this was addressed earlier. I came late. I haven't gone to grad school yet. I plan on becoming a therapist and hopefully maybe do some research too. On ND, especially autistic people with CPTSD and PTSD. Do you know? I've looked all over. I haven't been able to find a single program that wasn't deficit model that focuses on autism. Every single, I mean, and I haven't like, thoroughly looked, but I've spent hours and hours and hours looking for a program in the US anyways, that isn't deficit based, but I haven't found any. I'm wondering if you know of any like academic programs that could like help me become that without having to just like focus on neurotypical people the whole time that I'm like in school and then being like, oh yeah, now I'm just treating neurodivergent people.
Well, what type of provider, what type of clinician do you want to be?
I mean, I still haven't really figured that out. All I know for sure, because when I first started taking classes in college, my goal was just to become a trauma therapist as soon as possible. And as I was taking psychiatry art like psych classes, I was just like, oh my god, like they don't know anything about us. Like I had just assumed they did, and I couldn't access it because of my money situation. And then when I realized there was just like this void, I was like, okay, no, I'm not just trauma. It's like trauma specific to neurodivergent people that I'm interested in. All I know is that I want to improve things. I'd like to help people specifically and or do research, but like that exact route or exactly where I want to end up, I'm just not sure of. I just don't feel like wasting all of my time learning about neurotypical stuff to be able to get a degree to be able to help people and then have to shift everything I've learned. Yeah.
I'm a while out of school, so it's hard. I do know that Loyola in New Orleans, their LPC program is heard really, really good things about that one.
Okay.
I think Smith College's social work program, I've also heard good things about. But I think the way that I when I was kind of looking up, I was like, how would I figure this out? And I was like, I would go to Google Scholar, I would look at who's like published things about like in that are neurodiversity affirming, and then reach out individually to those people, be like, what schools do you work at? And do you know of any other schools? Because those would be the people that would know the best, the people that are already in academics.
So.
And like, you find one from a couple from a PhD program, a couple from a LMFT, a LPC program, and then that gets your like networking started, and then somebody's gonna have some clues.
Okay. Sounds great advice. Thank you.
Someone was asking a reminder of how to do the hand raising. And if you just go to the bottom of the screen there, you'll see toward the right, there's a reactions with a little heart above it. If you click on that, the hand raising is at the very top. But again, if you need to, you can just wave in the screen and someone will see you.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I've got here through diagnoses that I think are partly rooted in trauma. However, I don't know that the DSM. I don't think it describes differences in traumatic experiences very well. I read the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and I don't know if anybody here is familiar with that book. I know that it's an old white dude that wrote it, so there's that perspective. But anyhow, I think that at least it's the only where I've heard of where when trauma happens to a developing human brain, as opposed to when trauma happens to a mature adult brain, that there's differences. And then I read that book after being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and before being diagnosed with autism. And so and now I'm thinking, well, where is the research on how childhood trauma or trauma on a developing neurodivergent brain is different from trauma inflicted on any age for neurotypical. I guess I'm interested in how all that affects medication management. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what my question is, but I saw some nods, so I guess, yeah. Thanks for sharing, letting me share, and thanks for sharing.
I did a research review in grad school as one of my final papers that was looking at the experience of emotional dysregulation between ADHD and borderline personality disorder. One of the main takeaways was that I couldn't really do an analysis because none of them were using the similar tools across their studies or defining emotional regulation or dysregulation in the same ways. So it was like, but something I did get out of it was that according to all like the research that ADHD, we all hear that borderline personality is caused by early attachment trauma. And that's kind of the main theory, but ADHD alone is as predictive of a BPD diagnosis as childhood trauma when controlled for childhood trauma. And one of my thoughts about that is when the ADHD mind is primed to have super intense emotional experiences. And then when those experiences are said, hey, you're being too much, you're being this, you're being that, that can really prime someone to develop a similar personality profile from a very, very different place. So I don't know. I don't think that research is out there yet. I think there's some of it. I wish I could think of a book right now, but is a really good question. And I think more and more I'm diagnosing someone with ADHD or autism, and then CTPSD with the trauma just being their existence as a neurominority, in the same way that I might diagnose like a Black teenager with like complex trauma just from racial trauma in life. Yeah. Well, yeah, DSM doesn't have CTPSD specifically yet, but I'll say PTSD and then in the notes, write complex trauma. Go ahead.
Sorry. Thank you. So, I had seen, so one thing I was thinking about, looking back on the neurodivergent umbrella, so like the stuff that relates to autism and like bipolar and ADHD, um, like, I mean, the amount, I just like, I mean, like, to do certain, like, is there like, are there some like nuances by which some people might kind of sort of tell a bit of a difference between autism and bipolar personality a disorder, like based on like based on how much based on the exact cases of the like interactions or something.
I think, and tell me if this answers your question, or if we want clarification. I always urge people, instead of, because often people use neurodivergent as kind of a euphemism for autism. And I think it's because they're uncomfortable like saying the word autistic. I always really urge specificity. Like when you talk about neurodivergent, it can talk about it if we're talking about the neurodivergent umbrella, the neurodiversity movement. But when you're talking about an individual, like to say neurodivergent is just to say that there is something different about them. So just to specify, like if you're talking about a person and they're okay with it, say an autistic person or a bipolar person, or maybe that person doesn't know yet what their form of neurodivergence is, but they didn't just know that they're different, or they don't want to share that much detail. I don't know. Does that answer kind of?
Yeah, like generally speaking, I think I might have shared like a couple of so like sometimes I think like I forget if I actually did this, but I think online, like after having a conversation that seemed to get a bit kind of like a little bit like strong or sort of like a little intense. It's like sometimes like when I apologize to people for kind of contributing to it um like sometimes I might like legitimately say I'm on the autism spectrum, like, or I am actually autistic. I was diagnosed at a young age because I was just so that they know that that's true and not something that, because I don't know if any of us has seen this, but sometimes I get the feeling that some people perceive others' rude behavior and they're saying like, well, I'm autistic as kind of like an excuse like for for inappropriate social behavior online. And just like, so like I always just try to clarify that this is something that happened. I was actually diagnosed with autism. So yeah. So yeah, I think that definitely answers so I think that observation that you made about like being specific like definitely helps with that, Reese. Thank you.
Yeah, and another thought on that is I think it's so context is dependent when when using like I'm autistic as a an excuse versus an explanation, you know, like I might explain if I'm super tired one day and I'm going into a meeting, especially if it's with people I don't know, I might explain, you know, I'm autistic, so my tone of voice might be really flat in this meeting. I'm not mad at you. That isn't an excuse for the content of what I say, just the tone of voice with which I say it. So it can be helpful clarifying information, but it should never, like, I think what you're saying is, or understanding too, is it shouldn't be used as an excuse for being a jerk.
Yeah, that's basically what I meant. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. One thing that I noticed as being diagnosed late for autism at 56 years old, a lot of, the research wasn't done on females or females assigned at birth. And I have two children also autistic, and it was amazing that they are also late diagnosed. And you mentioned something interesting earlier about giftedness, and I think that it was missed with us because we did really well in school when we were young. But even though we all have different presentations, our lives all kind of fell apart at the same ages, like right into middle school or the teenagers you were talking about. Is there more research, or have you noticed the difference because females tend to be just more social creatures and do more scripting, or because I've found out online a lot of people are getting turned down a diagnosis because you couldn't possibly be autistic because you have friends, or you're aware of it so you can't possibly be. So I think it's pretty frustrating. I was asking my daughter's pediatrician from the time she was like 7 months old, please give us a referral to a diagnostic pediatrician or a developmental ped. And, oh no, she's looking me in the eye, or, she couldn't possibly have, anything wrong, or even sensory problems. She didn't even get diagnosed till she was 18. And even though I had been asking and asking for years. So, can you shed any light on that and any changes that would happen?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts. I still see all the time, because I read psychological testing that kids get at school where they are trying to get an IEP for autism, and then they asked the examiner one reciprocal social question. They made eye contact, and they didn't flap their hands, so they are autistic. And I think that is that can be happen more with girls. I think it can also happen. So yes, girls are being missed, but it's actually the group that's missed the most is Black girls. And so I think it's not just that girls are being missed, but it's anyone. These tools were built on a white cisgender male sample. So it's anyone who isn't fitting into the specific picture of autism that ends up getting missed. So that's girls, anyone who's had to learn to mask or code switch. So girls, queer and trans people, people of color, all being missed for different reasons. But I think some of the tools like the MIGDAS 2, I'll write that in the chat, to like I was mentioning are kind of like better than at recognizing and digging into some of these things. That's one of the things I always suggest to people when they're going for an evaluation. Ask them, like, what tool are you using to assess for autism? Is if they're just using the ADOS or the ASRS, like try to find somebody that's doing the MIGDAS 2. And there was another piece on, also I think some of, again, with these tools being built on or normed on boys a lot of the time, there's these old tools that aren't that used much anymore called the emotional quotient and the systematizing quotient. And they're looking at how much of emotionizer or someone is versus a systematizer. A systematizer notices patterns and things. And the question, and I thought there was like a big content bias in these, because on the systematizer one, it was asking questions like, do you remember all of the schedules of the trains? Do you remember all of the strings of numbers on the license plates? But the girl who is the girl who's looking up all the different outfits on Pinterest and putting in categorizing them into the different types of fabric and different, like the fashion designers, these are systematizers too, but they're not captured on the systematizing quotient because of that content bias. I think there's a good Donna Henderson. There's a couple newer books. I think it's like, Is This Autism? And the Adult Guide to Diagnosing Autism, that are a little bit, that capture some of these things a little bit better. But there are more and more better evaluators out there. And I'll again speak to NeuroSpark as a really good one. And then also, so let me just put in the chat really quickly. Great evaluators. NeuroSpark is nationwide. Jamie Roberts is California. Jessica Hogan is California, Minnesota, and a couple other states. And then something I'll say on giftedness is, and again, I said my parents are here, so I hope they laugh a little bit at this. I did my first psychological testing when I was 6 years old. And I was put in the gifted program. But when I look back at my IEP, because my mom saves everything, thank you, Mom. My original IEP goals from like first grade were like around tone of voice, and like stage presence, and learning how to navigate self in group situations. So basically the goals that they were putting in place around giftedness were compensating for a lot of ADHD and autistic traits. And then when the gifted program went away in middle school, of course, things went downhill. So, what's up?
No, I just wanted to share based on what you just said.
Yep.
I really like the Is This Autism book.
Yeah.
I drove halfway across the country to try to finally get diagnosed because I was on the autism spectrum, I was off the autism spectrum, etc. So the head of this special diagnostic problem was sure that I didn't have it, but he'll let other people do it because I'm making eye contact. I have too good a sense of humor. An autism expert had the same reaction, and then an autism neurologist wasn't quite so sure, so she had me read Is It Autism when I got home and report back to her. And I had tons of stuff to report back to her, based on the book. So, and that convinced, along with getting a letter from a friend that I grew up with, that all convinced them that, yeah, I actually was. So, what was the MIGDOS, MDOS? What was the tool that you mentioned earlier?
MIGDOS. It's the Monteiro Interviewing Guidelines for Autism Spectrum. MIGDOS. Barry, I love that story because when I started doing autism evaluations, I would have people come in with they went through all the tools that I sent them, and they went through 8 websites, and they came in with a spreadsheet with Post-it notes on each page. And I'm like, we don't even need to move forward from here. Maybe just a little OCD screener, but I think you passed the autism test. They come in with the spreadsheet and the book, annotated book about how these things have happened over the course of their lives. Yeah.
We're coming up on 8:30 in a minute, so maybe
One more
person can jump in. And and could you put yourself back on mute? I would appreciate it. Thank you. Do you know how to do that? With the little microphone there on the left. Thanks, hon. I appreciate it. Thanks.
ahead.
Hi, really great talk tonight. I'm learning so much from all of these lovely conversations that are happening in the chat and also from you. I'm wondering if you could speak more to the relationship between trans and non-binary people and autism. What special considerations, I don't know. I guess I'm just curious about like there seems to be such a link there, and like what special considerations should trans autistic people be given?
And I have actually do a whole training on this, so I'll just do a little bit. I have a number of slides about this in the resources folder that I included. But one of the things, like the autistic ADHD teen group I run ended up being also a trans non-binary group. And because there is so much overlap, and a lot of the conversations we've had are about how if gender is a social construct, and a social identity, and part of the autistic experience is not aligning with social norms and living outside of these boxes, then there's something that doesn't necessarily make sense about genders given at birth. And a lot of folks identify as autigender or agender. And I think in terms of considerations, I think because we also have gender groups at my clinic, so it's always like talking with the individual and figuring out like what part of their identity development journey is most salient to them right now. Because if they're like, so that in therapy, the therapist is like, oh, you're trans, we need to focus on the trans stuff, but they're just they've known that for years and they just recently realized they're autistic, then like it doesn't resonate. So asking them what they need. Yeah. And I could say more, but I think we're out of time for now. Yeah. Thank you everybody for being here. Please feel free to reach out. I'll put my stuff in the chat one more time. And I'll also add I think a lot of people are in the Facebook group, so I'll put a couple things up there too.
Yes, and feel free, everyone, to start a conversation on Facebook to continue with your thoughts and your questions. We can do it underneath the announcement for this session would be a good place to continue. And Reese, this was golden. I can't thank you enough. Really beautiful, important information. So, and thank you for everyone who came tonight. And we have more sessions coming up that are exciting. If you go to the Facebook page, there's an events tab way over on the right-hand side of the Facebook page, and it will list everything coming up. And in the description, we always try to put the Zoom link, so that makes it easy for everyone to keep track of. So with that, thanks again, and I'll turn it over to Roger to close.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. I'm going to drop that link to the Facebook group. There are two Facebook groups. One is we recommend for autistic adults, and the other we recommend for parents, professionals, / providers, and other allies. So let me just see if I can just drop those in right now. Yeah, so I think if you all would like to continue the discussion, I think it's always a great thing when we use the platforms to sort of continue the dialogue. And it's a kind of a learning process. So I think that this is not just the event is a singular thing, but I think the conversations I believe are part of this sort of learning discovery process, which we're I think all part of together. All right, so this first one I'm going to drop in. So I dropped a link there, but it seems to be not actually displaying the Facebook link. But that first link you'll see ends with autism ethnography. So that's the page that Dawn is talking about. The second page I'll put in here that we recommend for professionals and other allies. So let me just drop that. Okay, it's not cooperating. I'm sorry. A lot of the automatic things in tech aren't necessarily what you want things to automatically be. So got to do a little maneuvering here. So that's the more of the general group. We share links to events on both groups. So either one of them, you should be able to access those links. So again, yeah, feel free to reach out to any of us, and I'll try to put those QR codes in the meetup group as well, so people can access them. But I thank you all for coming, and we have so much more stuff coming up. Dawn is the ultimate curator of all of this stuff. So you'll see it in the Facebook groups, but also in the YouTube channel. There's several dozens of videos already processed, and we've got so much great stuff that we have this big backlog now, which is, I guess, a good problem, but we got to figure out how we're going to decompress that. But thank you all very much for coming, and you have a great evening.